What type of learner are you? So there are 4 types of learners. First is visual learner, right? Someone who really just processing information by looking at graphs or images. The second type of learner is auditory learner, right? Someone who prefer to process spoken information, right? They like to be in meetings, they like to be in discussions and listening to lectures, right? The third type is a read or write learner, right? Someone who prefer to process written information, they like to read, they like to take notes and really just helping them process. And the last type of learner is kinesthetic, right? Which is someone who preferred to process information in a tactile way, right? They like to practice, right? They like to experience it. And for me personally, I'm a visual learner, right? I like to look at things and watch people do it and really just process looking at images and really just help us learn through things. And as Christians, God, right? God wants us to learn every day, and we are learning every day. And we are supposed to learn how to walk with God, right? We're supposed to learn how to walk closer with God, learn how to pray to the Lord, how to serve God better each day. We're supposed to learn how to grow in grace. And one of the area that really God wants us to grow in the most is our area of prayer. And God desired that we learn how to pray. And he desired that we learn how to get a hold of him, right? Be effective in our prayer life. And he desired that we can enter into his presence at any time. So, and Jesus here in this passage we just read is the best example for us to learn from on how to pray, right? And in Hebrews here, chapter 4, verse 14 to verse 16, we see that Jesus, he is the great high priest, our great high priest, right? Through him, we are a wretched sinner, right? Through him, we can have access to God, right? Because he is our great high priest, right? We can go before God in prayer through Jesus Christ. And that's why it's so important and so exciting, Lord, they will come to on Wednesday service here, right? Just watching everyone else, just partnering up, right? Have the prayer page, and we just go before God in prayer because that's a privilege that we have as Christians, right? God hear our prayer. God listening to our prayer through Jesus Christ, our great high priest. Not only is Jesus our great high priest, but he's also our intercessor. That means he's praying for you. He's praying for you right now, right? Whatever you're going through, what trial you have, right? Jesus knows. And he's praying for you, whether you feel lonely, whether you're struggling with, you feel helpless or in distress or just feel weary. Jesus knows that, and he's praying for you. And Jesus, he is the greatest example for us to follow. So, and we should really model our prayer life after him, right? And the Bible here tells us in Hebrews chapter 4 that Jesus, he faced the same trial, the same temptations, right? The same issues that we have in our life, and yet without sin. He was tempted at all points, yet without sin. And Jesus knows, right? The trial we go through and the pain that we have and the distress that we face. And that is why we should model our prayer life after Jesus Christ. So tonight, we're going to study a topic, a major aspect of Jesus' prayer life that is very easy for us to overlook. And not a lot of us are practicing. So, and this topic is on solitude prayer. Solitude prayer, a solitude time with God. And throughout the gospel, right, the 4 gospel accounts, if you study it, you would see that there are 9 different recorded instances of Jesus. He's secluding himself away from the people, and he would seclude himself and just spending solitude time with God. Solitude time with God. And, in 7 out of those 9 instances, the Bible tells us specifically that Jesus, he spent time in prayer, in solitude with God. And, if Jesus did it once, it's important, right? But it's recorded over 9 times, more than 9 times, but throughout the different parallel passages, but 9 instances of how Jesus, he secluded himself and have spending that solitude time with God. So, and that's very important. So we ought to study it. We ought to model our life after Jesus and practice it as well. So the question I want you to think about is this: have you ever spend time in solitude with God? Away from the people, away from distractions, just you and the Lord. Have you done that before? And no matter where you're at in your life right now, and whatever you're going through, you can practice that today. And let's study this out a little bit and allow it to help us in our personal life so that we can draw closer to God. So let's look at the first point here. We see the purpose of solitude. The purpose of solitude. In the 9 instances when Jesus secluded himself in solitude with God, we find 3 different purposes that of how Jesus used his solitude time with God. Okay, so the first purpose we see, Jesus used it as a time of preparations, a time of preparations. And there's about 3 examples here I'm going to show you. But the first instance, we saw that Jesus, he was preparing for his public ministry. He was preparing for his public ministry. And the example we see here is Mark chapter 1. And Mark chapter 1, verse 12 to verse 13, it say, and immediately the Spirit driveth him into the wilderness. Verse 13, and he was there in the wilderness 40 days, tempted of Satan, and was with the wild beasts, and the angels ministered unto him. So here, we see that Jesus, after he got baptized, the Bible tells us that the Spirit drove Jesus to the wilderness, right? So he secluded himself into the wilderness there, and there we know from the parallel passages, we see that Jesus, he spent time fasting, right? He spent time praying in those 40 days, and during that time, he was also tempted, right? He was tempted by the devil, yet without committing any sin. Okay, so that's the first example very first example we see in the Bible recorded of how Jesus secluded himself in time of solitude with God. The second example we see in the Bible is from Luke chapter 6, verse 12 to verse 13, is when Jesus preparing to ordain his 12 disciples before sending them out to minister to people. And in Luke chapter 6, verse 12 to verse 13, it say, and it came to pass in those days that he went out into a mountain to pray and continue all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called to him his disciples, and of them he chose 12, whom also he named apostle. So before sending out the 12 apostles to minister and be able to help people and healing them, right? Jesus had to spend the whole night just praying, right? Praying for the disciples, praying for the people that will be ministered to. And he went to a mountain, right? He secluded himself. He spent that alone time with God in preparation. So that's example number 2. Example number 3 we find in Luke chapter 22. This is where Jesus preparing for the crucifixions, right? Jesus preparing for crucifixion. So Luke 22, verse 39 to verse 41, it said, and he came out and went, and as he was wont, to the Mount of Olives, and his disciple also followed him. And when he was at the place, he said unto them, pray that ye enter not into temptation. Verse 41, and he was withdrawn from them about a stone cast, and kneeled down and pray. Again, we see an example here of Jesus really just withdraw himself away from the people, right? And here he's at Mount Olive in the garden there, and he's just preparing himself for the crucifixions, right? For all the agony that's going to happen to him, right? Jesus was in great agony at this time because the crucifixion is going to happen very soon, right? It was a time of distress. It was a time of the agony. So Jesus used his time to seclude himself in solitude, praying to God. Now, just like Jesus, right, spending time in solitude as a time of preparation, we need to be in solitude as well as we prepare ourselves, right? What are we preparing ourselves for? First, we should be using the solitude time with God to prepare ourselves for the work of the Lord. For the work of the Lord. And our church is a busy church, and I'm thankful for that. And many of you are serving in many different ministry, right? Ministry we serve in, some of you guys are Sunday school teachers, some of you are AGG teachers, right? Some of you are club sponsored and singing in the choir, playing in the orchestra, right? Serving in the live stream AV media ministry and with the bus ministry. You're serving a different capacity. And at that time, right, before we serve, we need to prepare ourselves, right? We cannot just come and be ready, just relying on our own strength, own power. We need to prepare ourselves just like what Jesus did, right? Even for the big outreach we have at our church, right? With Friend Day passed recently and an upcoming event, which is a Christmas musical and the Easter for this in April coming up soon there. All these big events, before an approach, we should spend time in solitude with God, preparing ourselves for it, because we want to be able to minister to people, just like what Jesus did. Each time before he go and minister to people, he spent time preparing himself. And before we minister to people, we need to prepare ourselves through solitude with God. Secondly, we can use our solitude time with God to prepare ourselves for making important decisions. We make a lot of important decisions in our lives. And we make a lot of decisions every day, right? Small decisions, big decisions. And, we need to prepare ourselves for those important decisions by spending time in solitude with God. Decisions such as what college to attend, right? What job what career path you want to take, right? Or whether to make that big ticket item purchase, right? Who to marry, right? What kind of education you give to your children, such as changing job, right? All these big important decisions you have to make, you should come before God first, before you make that decision. You should spend time in solitude with God so you can make the right decisions. And the third thing we can use the solitude time with God is to prepare ourselves for being in the will of God. Being in the will of God. Just look at Jesus, right? On the third example there, right before he was preparing for the crucifixion there, he was really struggling, right? Because he knows God's will for his life was really to take on that cup, right? That cup being crucified on that cross. And through his prayer, you can tell he was struggling. Like, Lord, if it's okay for me to pass on this cup, right? But at the end of that prayer, guess what? He surrendered to that will, right? The will of the Father. And for us, right? If you are still looking for God's will in your life, you need to spend time with God to find out, right? You cannot find out God's will through social media or just listening to some other people, right? You need to listen to God. And that's why it's important for us to spend time in solitude with God, okay? So that's the first purpose. The second purpose, we see Jesus use his time of solitude with God as a time of rest, Now, an example here I want to share here, and we see it about 4 instances that really support this example, is Jesus, he recharged himself from a long day of ministering to people. Do solitude time with God, right? 4 instances we find how he secluded himself. First is in Mark chapter 1, verse 32, verse 35. So here, the Bible tells us that at even when the sun did set, they brought unto him all that were diseased and them that were possessed with devils. Verse 33, and all the city was gathered together at the door. Can you imagine that? At your house, the whole city, everyone just come to your door, right? Just expecting you to heal them, right? And expecting you to cast out devil. And the Bible says the whole city came, right? Everyone just gathered at the door where Jesus was at. And here, verse 34, it says, and he healed many that were sick of diverse disease and cast out many devils and suffered not the devil to speak because they knew him. In verse 35, after a long day, long evening of serving people, look at what happened in verse 35. And in the morning, rising up a great while before day, he went out and departed into a solitary place and there prayed. That's important, right? After a long day of serving God, you know what most of us like to do? We like to sleep in, right? We like to sleep in. We like to just lie in the bed, right? Not doing anything, not thinking about anything. But that's opposite of what Jesus did, right? He rose up early before the sun even come up, right? He already had a long night. So I don't even know if he had any sleep here. He departed himself and went into a solitary place. The next example I want to look at here is Luke chapter 5. So just here is another instance here. After a long day of healing. So look at verse 15. It said, "But so much the more when there a fame abroad of him, and great multitude came together to hear, and to be healed by him of their infirmities." Verse 16, "And he withdrew himself into the wilderness and prayed." Again, right? Long day of serving people, right? Healing people. And he withdrew himself, right? Into the wilderness and spent time in prayer. Another example is after the feeding of the 5,000, right? After feeding 5,000. And every time I read that, it's just really amazing, right? Just thinking about feeding 5,000. And that's just a small number, right? If you count the women, you count the children, that's probably over 10 to 15,000 people there. And you know, at our church, right, every time we have banquet or even serving food, right, I think the most we have probably, 500 people for a banquet setting? Man, that's a lot of work, right? We have to make sure there's enough food, and that's just for 500 people. Imagine 15,000 people, right, serving them, right? How tired you must be, right? And here, look at verse Matthew chapter 14, verse 23. This is after feeding the 5,000. The Bible tells us, "And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone." So here, again, long day of serving, right? Long day of ministering to people. He went to find a place just by himself to be in solitude with God. Another instance is this is another time of feeding the 4,000, right? If you guys read the Bible in chapter 15 of Matthew, after feeding the 4,000, Matthew 15, verse 29, it says, "And Jesus departed from thence and came nigh unto the Sea of Galilee and went up into a mountain and sat down there." Right, just a time of rest, right? Just being solitude with God. And here, right, these are examples that Jesus show us of how important it is that we need to find rest in solitude with God. But not only did he live it out, but he, in the Bible, it also gave us account of where Jesus instructed his disciples to do the same. He instructed the disciples to rest after they come back from ministering to the people. In Mark chapter 6, verse 30 to verse 32, and say, "And the apostle gathered themselves together unto Jesus and told him all things, both what they have done and what they had taught." Verse 31, "And he said to them, Come ye yourself apart into a desert place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat." Verse 32, "And they departed into a desert place by ship privately." So Jesus instructed his disciples to do the same, right? To really, after a long day of just long ministry, right? Serving people, hey, you need to take some time, right? Find a place of rest. And so what's the application here? Well, we need to find rest in God's presence. We need to find rest in God's presence. Each time that Jesus had a long day of ministry, right? We saw that he was spending, after spending all day healing the people and casting out devils and preaching and teaching and serving the people, right? We always find Jesus end up in solitude, spending time with God to find rest. And that's important. And, we need to find rest as well, right? After serving the Lord. Like I said earlier, I'm thankful our church is a busy church, right? I'm thankful that we're able to be busy serving God, right? Busy trying to win souls to Christ, busy trying to minister to people, busy just fulfilling the Great Commissions. And we just came out of a very busy season, right? We it felt like forever ago, but just October here, right? We had many outreach events, right? We had our harvest outreach, we had our friend day outreach, and then the club ministry that had their own evangelistic events, and then we have on top of all the Sunday school classes, HGG classes with the extension ministry, and then people being in choir, orchestra, practicing for Christian musical. It's a really busy time. And if you're not careful, you can find yourself being weary and tired, right? You might feel burnout, right? And that's the time. That's when we need to go to the Lord to find rest, right? We need to find rest in the Lord. And oftentimes we find rest in things of this world, rather to go to God, right? We find rest in social media, right? We just be on our phone scrolling 2 or 3 hours, just scrolling, right? And we think that's rest, right? Or you might find rest in entertainment, right? Just turn on a movie and just relax, right? Or you find rest in food, right? You're like, oh, I need to treat myself to something good, right? You go and get some really good food or really good dessert, right? Or find rest in your hobby, right? Some people like to maybe just do something that they like to really help them relax, right? All these things can only satisfy your physical and fleshly desires. You can only find spiritual rest in God. In God, just spending time with Him, spending time in that solitude with God. So the third purpose, we find that Jesus used the time of solitude with God as a time of grieving, of a time of working through grief. Okay, so here, one example we find is in Matthew chapter 14, verse 9 to verse 13. Here we saw that Jesus, he was working through grief after John the Baptist got beheaded, right? In the Bible, it tells us here in Matthew chapter 4, verse 9 to verse 13, it says, "And the king was sorry. Nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. And his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel. And she brought it to her mother." Verse 12, "And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it and went and told Jesus." Pay attention here to verse 13. "When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the city." So here, Jesus received the news that John the Baptist, he was beheaded. And just like you and me, Jesus has emotion, right? He experienced the loss of a loved one, right? John the Baptist was his cousin, right? And he, after receiving that news, he secluded himself, right? He departed, he went to a desert place and worked through his grief. And the application is here is this, church. We need to find healing through solitude with the Lord. We need to find healing through solitude with the Lord. What do you do when you go into grief? When you lose a loved one, when you lose a job, or when you experience an end of a relationship, what do you do to work through that grief? And many people, right, in this world, they resort to things to help them to grieve, right? They turn to alcohol, they turn to drugs, right? They turn away from God. They stop reading the Bible. They stop praying. They stop coming to church. They stop spending time with God. But as Jesus here, he illustrated, when we go through grief, we need God, right? More than ever before. We need to spend time with him, right? When you go into grief, you need to spend more time with God, and we need to be in solitude with him, right? So we can find a healing that only God can give us. And so here we see the purpose, right? The first point, we see the purpose of solitude. Next, let's go into a little bit more application here. The practical part is, let's find the practice of solitude. The practice of solitude. From the example Jesus gave us, we can see how we should practice solitude with God, how we should practice solitude with God. First, we need to remove ourselves from distraction. Remove yourself from distraction. In the 9 instances when Jesus secluded himself, he either went to, the Bible tells us he went to a desert place, a mountain, right, a wilderness, and all these places have one thing in common. There's no people there. There's no people there. It's a place with no people, right? It's a place with no distractions. It's a place where you are all alone. It's a place you're all by yourself. And ideally, right, that's what we should do as well, right? We should really try to find a place. Maybe drive up a mountain somewhere, right? Drive up some wilderness somewhere, right? And really spend that time with God, away from people, away from distractions. And if you could do that, right, that's great. You should schedule that time and do it. But, for those who couldn't, and I know it's tough, right, we need to still find a place where we can be removed from distractions so we can spend time with God, right? It might be in your car, right? It might be in your office, the office room at your house where you're removed from distraction. Maybe in your garage, late at night, right? When everyone's sleeping, right? You can be there by yourself, right? Maybe it's a place where you can stay late in your office, right? After work, right? Where everyone have left and you just spend time alone with God. And it needs to be a place free of distractions, right? I mean, we should turn off our phone, right? Put away our phone, put away our computer, our iPad, right? Mute our phone and turn off all the music and really just find that quiet, distraction-free place to meet with God. Next, we need to spend time in prayer and fasting during our solitude time with God, right? As Jesus illustrated, whenever he was in solitude, he came to God in prayer. He came to God in prayer, right? He spent time praising him, right? We should be spending time praising him, spend time giving thanks to God, right? Spend time confessing our sin and spend time supplication for others, right? Bringing our requests before God and just asking God to guide us, right? To help us and help us stay in his will. And not only did Jesus spend time in prayer, but he also fasted, right? There's some instance where he fast and prayed. And when we fast and pray, it's tell God that we are serious, right? Whatever request we have, we're serious, right? We're willing to give up our physical need for the spiritual needs, right? So we need to use that time, right, for fasting and praying. And lastly, we can use the solitude time with God to get physical rest. Get physical rest. As Jesus commanded his disciples after a long period of ministry to find rest in Mark chapter 6, verse 31, and let me read it one more time for you. It says, "And he said to them, 'Come ye yourself apart into a desert place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat.'" And here, right, the disciples, they were so busy. They were just serving people. And the Bible even tells us that they didn't have time to eat because just people just keep on coming and going, and they just didn't have the leisure to find time to eat. And Jesus reminded them, hey, you need that time of rest, right? Remove yourself, right, from just seclude yourself, right, and get that physical rest you need, right? So when we are in solitude with the Lord, after we have met our spiritual needs, we should use that time to take care of our physical need, right? Take care of physical need. It might mean that you need to get some time to catch up on your rest, right? Maybe you might have to sleep a little bit more, right? To let your body recover, right? It might mean that you need to eat something healthy, right? To really help nourish your body. Whatever it is, right? Use that time to help get some physical rest. And Jesus here, right, we just look at really all the example really throughout his life here. Jesus lived his life as an example, showing us how we can be in solitude with God. And through his example, we also see what solitude with God can produce. Okay, so being in solitude with God, it produces effectiveness. Effectiveness. Friends, if you want to be more effective in the ministry you serve in, you might have to take some time in solitude with God. Just being by yourself with the Lord, right? Meeting with him. God can help you reach a level you never reached before, right? A level of effectiveness you haven't seen before. Secondly, being in solitude with God can provide healing. It can provide healing. Jesus found healing through his solitude with the Lord. Friends, you can find healing this evening. Are you hurt? Right? Are you going through grief right now? God can help you. Right? The things of this world cannot help you, but God can. Right? Spend that time, alone time with him. And then the third thing is that being in solitude with God, it can give you rest. Rest. And Jesus, he was recharged. Right? We see every time, right? Jesus, after he spent time solitude with God, he was recharged. He was ready for the next day to minister to people. Friends, are you tired this evening? Are you weary, right, from all this ministry that you're in? Are you ready to give up? Come to him this evening, right? Find that time. Be in solitude with God. And just ask him for rest, and he will give it to you. And then the last thing, being in solitude with God can help you find and keep you in God's will. Help you find and keep you in God's will. And as I encourage our young people in middle school, right? Now's the time to find God's will. And if you have not found God's will yet, hey, ask God, right? And if you know what God's will is and you're not in God's will, hey, come to God, right? Get back on track, right? And ask yourself, what do I need to do right now to be in God's will? Spend some time in solitude with God and get right with him.